Like the league didn't weed this bullshit out. Meg did, Steph did, Molly did. Like that's who held the league accountable. And also like the players obviously too, but you know, that speaks to the issue with the way we cover women's sports, because the league has gotten away with certain things because there weren't journalists there to dig about it, to ask questions, to get to the bottom of some of these things that went on. And so when you talk about how the league, like my hope for how the league progresses and is covered, we need more reporters, because with more reporters, then more stories get told, the league gets held accountable, but also the league needs transparency.
We're here with Annie Costabile, former University of Iowa graduate, now journalist for the Sun-Times. She primarily covers the Chicago Sky. Some Red Stars are dabbled in there, but we actually met on her Red Stars beat back in the day when Tina was in journalism school. So I'm really excited to have you on, just because it's a nice like blast from the past, someone I respect in the journalism space, and the first media member in women's sports generally that we've had on, which is really important for us. So welcome.
Oh my God. I'm so honored to be the first media guest. Thanks for having me.
We love it. We love it. So let's talk a little bit about you first, because I actually don't even know the answer to this, but what led you to pursue a career in sports journalism? And did that stem from like a deep passion for sports from a young age? Or just talk a little bit about that journey.
So I loved sports, but was not like this like naturally gifted athlete. I think I'm athletic. Like I still like I get in the
I
gym.
see you grinding at the gym.
Yeah,
I see your posts.
I'm definitely athletic, but there was never like a moment my family looked at me and was like, damn, she's gonna be something great. So I was always really attached to sports because of like the team environment, and it was like a second family. I loved, the grind of 2-a-days. Like I loved being around like my teammates and coaches. It was just always so fun for me. And so I never thought ever that I could be a professional athlete. Like I never thought that was possible. But as I got older, I knew I wanted to stay in sports however I could do that. So when I was really young, I used to think, oh, I'll be a teacher and like maybe I could coach like high school sports. Like that'll be, I'll live in
that's Joe. She's the coach.
I was like, I'll live in the same town I grew up in and it'll be great. And when I was in high school, I started to really get like invested in LeBron James. He was like my idol. And so I used to come home from practice basketball. I played basketball my whole life. And I used to come home from practice and watch his highlights on YouTube, which is so lame. But I would like fall down a rabbit hole, go back, to his St. Vincent, St. Mary highlights. There was all these, sideline reports. It was like random people with cameras, like, getting these interviews with him and his teammates. And I just remember one time my mom goes, you could do that one day. I'm like, I certainly can't be LeBron James. So what are you talking about? And she just was like, you could be the person that asks him the questions. And I was like, okay, like, let's do it. Sign me up. I was probably like 15 or 16. And ever since that moment, that was it. I was sold.
I love that.
Amazing.
So at a young age though, how do you, like, obviously with high school, there are teams that you can try out for, there are teams that you can participate in. How did you start to kind of hone in on that craft once you realized at an early age? What kind of opportunities are out there for a young kind of journalist?
So when I was in high school, we had a school like journalism program.
Okay.
I didn't participate in it. Sorry to Addison Trail. That's where I went to high school. Sorry to the teachers. Like no one ever asked me to do it. So it's not like I felt like, oh, I let anybody down, but I was like having fun. I was not trying to become a professional journalist at 16. I just knew that's what I wanted to do. So when I was in high school, like I was enjoying myself. I was playing basketball. I was having fun with my friends. Like I didn't commit myself to it until I got to college. And when I got to college, the like front facing woman was Erin Andrews. Like everyone wanted to be Erin Andrews, and she's incredible. Like I never share this story as like a knock to EA. Like she has no idea who I am, and I have like the utmost respect for her and the career she's built. But when I look back on it now, I just find it so interesting that every woman wanted to be like Erin Andrews. Like, why weren't we wanting to be like, it's interesting to me when I think about that. And so for a long time, I went down that broadcasting route because I thought, well, I'm a girl, I'm a woman, like I have to put on my makeup and do my hair right and get dressed up, and Annie Costabile reporting for duty. And it's like, that wasn't the true path for me. And slowly through my career, I figured that out. But it was once I got to college that I started to see more opportunities and like take advantage of more opportunities.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's also cool because that's part of what we're striving for in terms of like having that role model. It's interesting to see, like thinking about your age, you're still young, but like thinking about how you talked about when you first talked about an athlete, you talked about a male athlete. Mm-hmm. And then you talked about journalism, right? And I think a lot of us had that same kind of like, okay, Erin Andrews. I also was like that. I thought I wanted to be an Erin Andrews. And it's just interesting because I think it also applies to sport. And what's so critical about what you do now is like, we need to, let these women be seen, because I want to be influential on a 9-year-old to say, I want to be the next, like Stephanie Dawson, or I want to be the next Danny Colaprico, or whoever it may be. I want to be like them. And I feel like when we were young, there was like Mia Hamm. There was like one person and they looked one way and had one skin color and whatever. And it's like, now we're becoming more diversified. There's more coverage. And I feel like that's what's so amazing about what you have in your hands and are able to do, at least in the Chicago area, is bring more attention to that and show it in different ways, which is cool.
Well, I appreciate that. That's a really kind thing to say. I agree with you. When I was growing up, we didn't watch the WNBA in my house. And I asked my mom about that recently. And so for me, the basketball player that was a woman that I knew about and thought was, obviously magnificent was Lisa Leslie. Like I remember as a little kid, like if you were a girl and you played basketball, Lisa Leslie was at least for me an icon. But we still we didn't watch the WNBA. So recently I asked my mom that. I was like, because I grew up in a house raised by women, like single women, my mom and my grandma. So I grew up in a very welcoming, supportive, outspoken, beautiful house. And it just looking back, I'm like, wait, why weren't we watching the WNBA? Why weren't you, putting on the U.S. women's national team's games? Like, I just didn't understand. And she even answered, she's like, I honestly don't know. We just always watched. She
probably just wasn't even aware it was happening.
Yeah.
Like she wasn't like, oh, we didn't want to watch it. She was like, I really don't know. I just remember when we would put on sports, we would watch the Bulls, or, we were a big NBA White Sox house. Like we didn't, I don't really fuck with football, or American football, but yeah. So anyways, you're right. We have to put it, women's sports have to be in the same place as men's, where if you're just turning on the TV, a WNBA game is on. If you're, just looking for something to watch or to read, you're reading about Danny Colaprico or the U.S. women's national team. Like that's what has to be. It has to be like second nature, the same way that men's sports is second nature to a lot of households.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think it's funny you mentioned Lisa Leslie, because I remember playing backyard basketball on my computer, and she was the only female that was available to pick. So you kind of mentioned you were raised in a single by women. What kind of led you to pursue women's sports rather than kind of go down the path of just, pursuing, the men's side and being a journalist on that side? What led you to the female side?
So I love this question because I think it's a good opportunity to be really honest about what the priority was in college. And so when you asked about like when I started to really get experience as a journalist, it was at the University of Iowa, and the priority was covering the men's teams. It was covering the University of Iowa football team. Kirk Ferentz is a historic coach. It was being at his press conferences, and then it was covering Fran McCaffrey and the Iowa basketball program, like women's sport. And then you think about it, like Lisa Bluter is a historic coach, men or women, coaching the women's basketball program there.
Yep.
So anyways, in college, I still thought if I was going to be successful, or if I was going to be, successful, I had to cover, the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball. And I'm never going to not say that because, that was what was being projected around me. And that was just the reality. And I'm not too I don't know. I'm not embarrassed to say that because I think it's important that we acknowledge like what the priorities were and how do we change that. So anyways, I graduated and was covering high school sports. So I wasn't even covering professional sports here in Chicago. I was covering high school. And then I got an opportunity to go down to Mississippi. And again, I was the high school sports
Midwest
editor.
girl down to the
I'll
south.
say that's a culture shock. That's a big culture shock.
It was a time. It was for sure a time. So I was still covering high school sports down there, but was covering like girls basketball, like girls and boys sports. So when I got back up to Chicago and was with the Sun-Times sports staff, and it's such a saturated sports market. And I remember my first couple months, I was like, why is there no story on Tierna Davidson here? Like T's, when she got drafted, that was my first year at the Sun-Times. And so the season's coming up. And I remember like my boyfriend at the time, he was like, hey, you should work on profiles on all the first round draft picks, or like pitch profiles on this first round draft pick, that first round draft pick. So yeah, I'm looking and I'm like, why is no one in Chicago talking about Tierna? Because like her story is so fucking cool. Like she wanted to be an astronaut and instead became a star on the national team. Like what a
like every Stanford girl.
Right. I was like, okay, second place is a great place for Tierna to be. Like her second life option is she's doing great. So anyways, that was actually how it was like almost, it was just like getting smacked in the face with the most obvious thing ever. And I was like, how have I not been doing this my whole life? Like, how has this not been my priority my whole life? But once I saw that gap, I was like, I would never even feel right going back to covering men's sports fully, because it would feel like I'm just another Joe Schmo writing about shit that doesn't need to be written about.
It's so,
I love that answer.
It's interesting that you say that too, because that was like my culture shock going to Medill at Northwestern. Was like every sports specialty was like NBA, NFL, NBA, NFL, NBA, NFL, whatever way, or, little town, wherever I have to go to first, I will do that to get to the NFL or NBA. And I remember being like, I guess my background just in soccer, I was like, that's not what I want to do at all, because I just see such a major gap. That's like we even talk about it now. I guess I can announce this now, Joe. I didn't really say it last pod, but I actually work for the league, in the league now. I'm the partnerships manager for Gotham FC. So I went down the marketing partnership side, didn't end up doing the journalism piece. But the interesting part is just like knowing what opportunities we have and seeing people in the market for journalism. It's so interesting because I'm like, when would you get the opportunity to get like FaceTime with players or like on-field access or get like, I'm sure you've seen it probably in your own reporting, but I feel like the women, especially, they're very authentic. They go layers deep. And I never forget Jay Adonde, who's like runs our program at Northwestern. He showed this like picture once at the NBA All-Star game. I think it was in Chicago one year or somewhere. And you just see LeBron James. I mean, when I say 100 minimum, 100 reporters, every single one of them trying to like get one of 8 questions that he's going to answer.
Right.
And he told this amazing story about how one kid at Medill had like this really cool question and he got it in. And in my mind, I'm like, that seems like I've wasted 45 minutes sitting in front of a podium that I'm probably not going to get a question in, where like, you even know it better than anyone. When you go to Red Stars games, it's like one of, I hate to say this because I wish it was more, but it's like one of 5 of you guys that are like covering that day. And I just feel like there's so much more opportunity to your point, get these incredibly deep stories and like, let us know these women at a more authentic level than you necessarily get on the men's side. So I always saw it as an opportunity earner, but it's just interesting that like, I'm glad you brought attention to that because people don't realize like that is always every person I've met, that's been the priority, men's sports. And if I have to do women, I will kind of thing.
Well, I think it just is important too for like institutions to start acknowledging why that's even, you know, being encouraged or not encouraged, but there's not a deeper dive into, okay, but why do you want to cover the NBA? Like, you know, I just think that at a very base level, we need to start acknowledging women's sports on the same level as men's. And I'm talking like day one back in kiddie school, like grade school, you know, because then, you get to college and everybody's conditioned to think men equals success, like women equals settling. Like why the fuck is that why is that even, you know, but that's unfortunately our conditioning. And so if we're lucky, we have a personal experience that like snaps the conditioning and like the light comes through and you're like, wait, what? And it all makes sense. But yeah, I mean, and not to knock the incredible journalists covering the NBA or the MLB and that do a great job bringing unique coverage to those teams. Like, I just think I don't know. I just don't want to do anything else other than.
Yeah. As like somebody is, you know, I'm a female coach. I coach college. Tina's in the female space. To have another person that is super, super passionate just about helping females and bringing light to what they're doing. Just from talking to you for 30 minutes now, like, I just think that's so cool to feel that, you know, I'm kind of doing it from the soccer end, Tina's kind of doing it from the corporate end, and then you're kind of coming in and trying to make sure that that's elevated on the journalist side. So that's really, really cool. And I love hearing all your answers about everything.
Well, I'm very lucky. I'm living my dream. So it's very easy to talk about. So thank you.
Also, like, why not be the first?
Yeah.
I always say that. I'm like, it's kind of like when you're looking at a college, right? Like, there's nothing against going to like, and sorry, Joe, there's nothing against going to like a legendary program. She went to UNC, was part of the UNC soccer. Like, that's a legendary, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think there's something really unique. And that's kind of why I wanted to work back in the league. I'm like, you could be the first, right? Like, so as an example, and I want to get into this, like you said, a lot of your coverage is for the Sky, which amazing, right? They win. I mean, I watched the whole journey. I read some of your, like, I think it's an amazing, nothing's greater than covering a team that wins, right? Especially kind of like an underdog team. You have Candace Parker, who's like amazing as an icon in the space.
Listen,
So,
it was my first year covering them as like my beat. And I'm like, I'm not saying that it was because of me they wanted to
But it is.
But I'm also not saying it's not.
right.
I'm totally kidding if James happens to hear that. Totally.
Yeah. But what amazes me about it is kind of like, even now, right? Like, there's so many things that working on the partnership side, right? Like, we use sometimes the WNBA as a benchmark, right? Like, how is their progression? They've been around longer. They have a little bit more sophistication financially through their partnership, et cetera. And we look at that as well. And so I wonder, like, in your journey thus far, right, it seems as though you found an opportunity and you went after it. And I think part of what people have to understand too is, like, part of your job is to pitch ideas and say, like, give me an opportunity. This is something that can be good for the Sun Times. Like, people are going to attract to this, and you're kind of putting yourself out there and doing that. What has been kind of the greatest challenge thus far in your career when, you're working for a huge publication, really a national publication, and you are covering women's sports? What has been the greatest challenge in covering women's sports thus far?
I think for me personally, because I have a really hard time separating my personal feelings from, my job, let's say. So in this instance, my job. So for me, the biggest challenge has been knowing when I need to advocate for something versus knowing when I need to just be an unbiased reporter, right? So what I mean by that is, and there are a ton of examples of this in journalism and media, so as journalists, like a traditional journalist is taught to be unbiased, right? Like, you are not there to say women's sports rock and men's sports suck. Like, no one cares about my opinion. I'm just there to show up, to ask questions, to provide the truth, right? But the problem with that is, like, historically, news sports reporting has covered certain issues this way, has covered sports this way, has like covered these occurrences in our country's history in a very specific way. And when you break that down, like, the reason for that is because it was being reported by specific voices. And when I say that, I mean white men. So, so like, exactly. You're taught in school that advocating for coverage or inserting your opinion is wrong. And it is in certain instances, but the problem is when knowing when you need to advocate for something, because there's a discrepancy in the way we're covering things, like, even if you look at crime and the way historically crime was written about and the discussion about crime and
especially in Chicago.
And the neighborhoods it took place in, and the individuals that were written about, like, there was narratives that were being projected because of the voices that were relaying the stories. And again, this is by all means not every reporter. I'm not saying like,
for sure,
that's not what I mean, but historically, like, that contributed to biased reporting, because you're projecting one group of individuals this way, and let's say like men's sports this way, and you're completely ignoring women's sports. Like, that's not you doing a good job, that's your bias being reflected. So for me, it's just been knowing when I do need to, like, speak up, whether it's on social media or, in the privacy of like a meeting with my editor or someone else, and be like, no, this is important because we're doing this differently, and that's problematic. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. And I think for me, why I was drawn to it, I thought you were so talented too, is just like, you are someone that does not, I don't want to say takes that risk, but your opinion matters. And it mattered a lot to me and what you were talking about. I remember sitting down with you after a game, and you were very open about talking through like your experience, which I think some people, right, they maybe don't have fear in that, but they don't want to put that out there necessarily. And I think what's special is that, like, it's kind of interesting. I think sometimes too, it's like this, I'm glad to see that, like, we're kind of losing that like double standard. I think especially like with the NWSL this year, like, being transparent, we've had a lot of shit go down, a lot of inappropriate shit go down. And I'm glad that, like, people, not only players, but people in the media, people who have even seen some of these things and necessarily didn't have a time and place where they could open up at that moment, are speaking out or saying, this is like not right. Because you need that collective effort to kind of like strip something down and remake it. And so I'm glad you answered it that way, because that would be I obviously I don't work in journalism anymore, but I feel like, considering the right? Like, where's the line, right? With the Sun-Times,
Yeah.
especially, like, you guys are very well known. You have a huge presence in Chicago, but now even nationally. What is that line for you, and having to kind of teeter it by saying like, and to your point, it just sounds like knowing time and place kind of situation. But I feel like you, especially like, with what you do in terms of women's sports, like, you know, I'm sure even on the WNBA side, like not everything's perfect. I'm sure there's things that you've seen, you're like, wow, like they're not here yet, or they're not there yet, or this hasn't been fixed yet. And so, yeah, I just think I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's a really hard line to sit with, and also feel good morally. So, and I know you're an opinionated journalist, so
I think we're kind of taught that transparency is like, we should avoid it. Like, oh, I can't say that when I went to college, I didn't cover women's sports because that makes me sound like an asshole. And it's like, no, I'm being transparent. That's the truth. That's how it happened. Like, I am not a terrible person. I'm not a great person. I'm just a person. And that's what happened. But with transparency, or again, like, people struggle with being transparent because of then the negative narrative that gets associated with sometimes what you're being transparent about. And so I think sometimes people worry about maybe burning a bridge or doing more damage than good. And those are all things you have to think about, but you also have to think about like, what's right. It's like, what's right, what's wrong kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? So, these are all just questions that I kind of like asked myself before going off the handle.
yeah, I know it's like hard too. I feel like it's like, oh God, you probably have to bite your tongue a lot more than most.
I usually don't bite my tongue. Like I
love it.
Yeah, I don't worry about like biting my tongue. If I have something to say, I'm going to say it, but it's just more so about how you say it. Like my grandma taught me really young, you know, you don't have to yell to be heard. And so, yeah, sometimes I struggle with that. And like, I want to go on off and say X, Y, and Z. But if I say X, Y, and Z this way, no one's going to hear me. So like, I definitely don't bite my tongue, but it's all about like how you use your tongue.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I feel like, sorry, I just need to bring up this one relevant thing right now is like, I think there's also the difference between being Annie, the reporter for the Sun-Times, writing for the Sun-Times and putting your name at the bottom of a Sun-Times reporter, and then Annie on Twitter as Annie herself. And I think the thing that comes to mind right now, and I'm sure you both have heard of it, but like all the things going on with Mina Kimes, who's a reporter for ESPN covering football, which is even a different thing, like a woman covering a men's sport. She has, I think Jeff Garcia came out and like basically shit talked her, like she doesn't know what she's doing. And a part of me is like, it bothers me because I'm like, they're still people. Like you can't, just because somebody like works for an organization and like represent, that doesn't mean that like they're, you know, they're not just a person. And also like, who are you to talk about credibility when you're not even in that? It's just stuff like that where I feel like there's like we forget that as fans sometimes, even if we're a former player. It's like Annie is not sometimes not Annie. Like she's still a person that can comment and have opinions that represent herself, that don't necessarily, it just bothers me sometimes. I think it's the hardest thing with journalists, especially, and being, as we talked about, transparent, being a journalist that's not a former athlete. I think it's even harder, to be honest with you, because there's a lot of steps that you don't get to skip, and even more that you have to prove, especially if you're a woman covering a men's sport. And it's, you know, this constant game of credibility, which is bullshit in my eyes. Cause I'm like, who are you? Not every person who played a sport knows a sport. Like Joanna's a coach. I'm never going to say I know coaching like Joanna, and I played for as many years as Joanna. So it's just things like that where it's like, don't get my blood boils. Sorry, Joe. I had to tuck that in there because I think it's just absolute bullshit.
Yeah, no, I'm laughing because like, I am not like the most brilliant basketball mind, but I love to get to know people and I love to share stories. And so I'm confident in what I bring to the table. So like anybody could say whatever they want about me. Like I excuse my French, but I just don't give a fuck. I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing. I'm gonna keep saying what I'm saying. Like,
yeah,
I just have already in my life experienced too much to let someone's opinion of me make me afraid to say what's on my mind or like do what I'm passionate about. It's just life's too short.
As in the wise words of my mother, she always tells me, you are a strong, independent woman. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. And also I think it's really like important to acknowledge even being raised by those women. Like think about how many women are raised by women with internalized misogyny and then how that ends up impacting them in their life. Like it's I do not take it for granted that I was raised by two women who believed in anything and everything I wanted to do with my life. Like
exactly.
so.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So in your opinion, how do you think we can improve kind of the coverage of women's sports and kind of specifically the NWSL? What do you think? What is your opinion?
So the NWSL, in my opinion, and we talked about this before we jumped on this call, like since taking over the Sky Beat, my job covering the Red Stars has had to unfortunately take a hit because their seasons are at the exact same time. And it's an unfortunate thing that we don't have a full-time Red Stars reporter. There are so many reasons for that, but just at the very base of it, like I would love to see, even just in Chicago media in general, the Red Stars with hired, beat reporters to cover that team. So that aside, some of my issues with the NWSL as a journalist are just that, again, the league lacks transparency. And we saw that this summer with multiple teams, like things went really south and the league failed to take responsibility and teams failed to take responsibility. And if you think about it this way, without Meg's reporting or without Molly's reporting or without Steph Yang's reporting, like where would the league be? These things would still be going on. These coaches would still have jobs. Like the league didn't weed this bullshit out. Meg did, Steph did, Molly did. Like that's who held the league accountable. And also like the players obviously too, but that speaks to the issue with the way we cover women's sports, because the league has gotten away with certain things because there weren't journalists there to dig about it, to ask questions, to get to the bottom of some of these things that went on. And so when you talk about how the league, like my hope for how the league progresses and is covered, we need more reporters, because with more reporters, then more stories get told, the league gets held accountable, but also the league needs transparency. Teams need transparency. Like it's not acceptable that the Red Stars former coach gets accused of what he gets accused of, and there's no accountability. There's
midnight
no
press
conference.
release.
Yeah.
A midnight press release.
Like that's problematic. And that's why people get away with saying that women's sports are less than, because if it was flipped and this was the Chicago Fire or the Chicago Bulls or the Chicago Bears, and a coach got accused of something as horrendous as what Rory Dames was accused of, there would be a press conference the following day and people would need to address what went on. No one has addressed what went on. No one.
Very true.
Yep.
So that's a really negative reflection of the league and these teams. Like
it's also like it's for me, you brought up a great point. I'm like, think about the current, because I think sometimes too, it's like everyone wants, because we don't have coverage, it's like, oh, like journalists should just be talking about the good things and It's like, think about the courage it took for those women to, first of all, obviously people I don't even think They understand the lengths, like for Sinead, as an example, the lengths in which they went. That was months in the making. Like,
Yeah.
Journalists, I know enough about background, like they are doing months and months of reporting to get to that level of putting their name on something that is obviously a very, like, it's a heinous like crime. Almost.
And even
so like,
further than that, like Meg built her reputation over years of work. Like those players didn't just decide, oh, hey, we're going to go talk to Meg today. Like they trusted Meg because of the work that Meg has done for years. So, you know, it's important to acknowledge like all the levels to it. And to your point about, you know, well, we need reporters talking positively about the league. No, you don't. That's not a reporter's job. And Candace Parker actually said it best in I think a podcast interview I listened, or some interview she did. She was talking about, you know, like the way that certain reporters even still cover the W, and like that it's almost like coming from these fan voices of like ultra support and great job, kiddo, like, you know, and it's like the players don't need that. The coaches don't need that. The league doesn't need that. Like, we're not here to be cheerleaders. Like, I'm not here to be like Sarah Gordon's personal hype team. Like, I'm not here to like follow a team around with a trail of like flowers. It's like, that doesn't do the league any good, the players any good, the coaches any, like that does nobody any good.
No. I mean, that's I think like all the points you made are just right on. Like it's spot on. And I think like that's the unfortunate part. We're still in it. Clearly there's still some stuff that needs to be sorted. Fingers crossed the CBA gets signed shortly here. But yeah, I mean, and part of all those things come into effect and the leverage players have gotten is because of the work of the media. So they deserve their flowers as well in terms of the impact they've made, and getting the players what they deserve and getting them in a position to actually fight for that. But we want to end on a little bit more of a positive note. You've obviously done a lot of different work, but what has been your most memorable moment thus far in your journalism career?
Oh my God, it's 100% the Skies Championship.
Yes, I figured, but
I mean, at least I didn't. I never set out and was like, oh, one day I'm going to cover a league championship. I don't know. I mean, I grew up in the Jordan Bulls era. We used to watch the team every night with my grandma. Dennis Rodman was my favorite player. Like, I could not wait to see how he styled his hair. Like, he was an icon. And, you know, watching them win their championships, I remember thinking like, oh, this is so cool. This is so cool. And so, you know, this season, I'll just say the entire season, but, you know, as the team got like closer and closer to actually fulfilling this goal of winning a championship, it was this surreal, just unbelievable journey, like personally, to all of a sudden start to realize, oh my gosh, you're going to get an opportunity to write the lead of the Sky winning their first championship.
Hardest part of journalism.
I went back and looked at so many archives, like so many stories from when the Bulls won their first championship. And like, it's 2021, or it was 2021 when they did it, but and they won their first ever championship. And it was with players like Candace Parker, Courtney Vandersloot, Allie Quigley, Diamond
amazing stories,
like James Wade. It was truly like a historic moment. And so to be able to write that story was like chills.
Was there a specific moment that when you were going through all that, like that you remember that you were like, oh my God, this is happening. This is what I'm doing. Cause I feel like as a former player, like you have those like moments where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm currently like on the field with so-and-so or so-and-so. Like, did you have that aha moment throughout that run?
It was truly, I remember before the finals series, even before the playoffs, even the entire season, like I remember talking with a friend and I'm like, I just want to be super present in this moment. Like I grew up not far from Candace Parker. I remember being in high school and you knew about Candace Parker. And again, like I said at the top of this episode, like I was not out here like, you know, aspiring to be like Candace Parker, but you just knew of her greatness. And so every time, you know, I got a chance to sit down with her, to sit down with Courtney, to sit down with James, like every moment I was so thankful for that. When the finals got there, it was literally like, I was present, but it was turned up a notch. So every moment felt really significant. And, you know, one in particular was sitting next to Diana Taurasi. And, you know, I was talking to her about, she actually played with Allie Quigley, like one of Allie's first years in the league. And just a funny story. So Doug Bruno, Allie's college coach at DePaul, he was like, Annie, everyone's going to be watching like Candace Parker and Courtney and Kalia. He's like, I want you to watch Diana and Allie, because Diana is kind of like this bully. And he wasn't saying that like, oh, screw Diana, she's like a bully.
Yeah.
But you know, Diana is like, she's gonna get in your ear.
Yeah.
She's gonna push you around. She's gonna be physical. And Allie is a very like head down, does what she does, like, and just lets her game speak for itself. So anyways, when I sat down with Diana, I was like, yeah, asking her about her time playing with Allie and what she thought about what Allie and Courtney have done, you know, with the Sky, because they've been with the Sky, you know, since forever, and built like the Sky into what they are. And she just was, you know, going on and on, being super positive about Allie. And then like game 3 came and she was like in Allie's face. It was just, it was like,
God,
that was something I was really thankful to, you know, get to hear about from Diana directly. And then, you know, the moment when they won.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
at home, like,
yeah. And they did it at home in front of a sold out crowd. And I file my story, you know, the confetti's coming down. I like send my story in, and then I like get up from my desk to like run on the court and get interviews. And I'm just like looking around, and Candace is hugging her daughter, and Courtney and Allie are crying, and Kalia's like got, you know, her MVP trophy, and Diamond's family's all there. It's like sports is truly a fucking transformative, like it's transformative.
It's special.
Yeah.
And you're part of that, because I guarantee you people were in those seats because they've seen your coverage. And I think what I love about that story, you probably don't even realize, but I think it speaks to you as a reporter, is to like, when you're one to like have those unique relationships. You're talking about the DePaul coach as an example. It's like, he's giving you a tidbit that no one else would know about for you to look out for. And you're taking the time to say, okay, like he mentioned that's an interesting thing. Let me like take a peek. And it kind of like is something that you never know. It could be like the next story that we just didn't know like existed. But this has been so incredible. You are awesome. I'm so happy that you're in that space and covering it. And I'm even excited now because like free agency is becoming a thing in the WNBA. Woo! So like, if you're a WNBA fan, if you're in Chicago, follow Annie. We're going to link all of her socials on here. Go listen to her Equal Play podcast. And just support her in the Sun Times. I think the Sky, I would imagine they're going to have another good year. And hopefully the Red Stars as well. So you have much to do.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's going to be another exciting summer for the Red Stars and the Sky here in Chicago. So absolutely follow both teams. And if you can, subscribe to the Sun Times.
Yes.